I hope you guys are doing good today. Just wanted to give you a quick update on the tropics and what's to come over the next few weeks, as well as today's forecast. So, looking across the tropical Atlantic Basin, we can see some very stable air working off of Africa and moving generally eastward, but almost southeastward just because of how strong pressures are up in this region. This is a general area of high pressure, just helping to keep things suppressed, helping to keep things from converging at the surface, really. Because you can't have convergence if you have high pressure at the surface. But we can see some pretty vigorous tropical waves working off the coast of Africa right now, kind of in tandem with each other, generally moving in this direction. But eventually they meet their demise once they get into these stable conditions out here. And we can see another tropical wave off of our coast and east of the Bahamas, working its way westward. This was once an interesting feature to track in the models a few days ago, but has since lost a lot of support thanks to the general upper level pattern not really allowing for favorable wind shear conditions. You can see a pretty strong high pressure here. Here's your trough. This is going to be responsible for kicking some of this energy out to sea, but also some of it could get caught in the Gulf over here. Kind of a messy illustration, but and we can see some lows up here, generally moving west to east. Can I not do this? Okay. Low here, and then we have a bit of a low here. Generally moving in this direction. And then you could see some more shower and thunderstorm activity here. Likely going to lead to some more spin ups in the eastern Pacific as this El Nino is really getting going now. All right, looking at the surface analysis of the Atlantic, see some healthy tropical waves as we just seen in the satellite. You have one right here, one there, and then there's our tropical wave that's going to be moving towards our coast over the next day or so, upping our rain chances. Very strong high pressure, 1025. Anything over like a 1022 is a pretty strong high pressure. And then you can see some isobars, 1016 this far south. It's not very favorable. You can see the monsoon trough off of Africa, kind of like a grapevine almost for these tropical waves. Kind of helps with moisture and convergence down here. And part of the ITCZ, you can see another tropical wave up here, another wave axis, some more breakaway energy from the jet stream, kind of a wave breaking pattern up here, almost like these high pressures split. But they generally move west, and that's kind of what this one did, but obviously isn't going to do anything. It's just too hostile to upper level winds. It's kind of just going to pull it apart. One piece of energy will go across the state, and then another one will kind of skirt up the east coast, like so. And we can look at the weather models, go look at the European. It's one I'd like to look at. We can see wind shear over time. This is going to be effective bulk shear from the low to upper levels of the atmosphere. It's kind of highlighting what areas are favorable and what areas are not favorable. For example, let me just find it. annotation here. See an upper level high here. Anything, if there was low pressure under this, it would help with, diffluence in the upper levels of the atmosphere. It would be like an exhaust mechanism for these tropical systems to grow, helping to evacuate the air in the upper levels of the atmosphere, which helps with thunderstorm growth and development. And then you can also see the Caribbean graveyard down here. This is very, very unfavorable. Wind shear is pushing almost 75, 80 knots. That is like over 90 miles an hour. Very unfavorable. Then they relax a little bit when you get in the MDR. Like this isn't bad here. Generally 10 to 20 knots of vertical wind shear. That's not the most unfavorable environment, but it's also not ideal for tropical waves coming off of Africa. I mean, if they were to be strong, it would be a different story. You can see a bit of another upper level high here. You see the wind vectors kind of pointing away from it, like so. Take all this off. Okay. All right. Now we can take this model out in time. And the European's a bit interesting because it tries to develop something in the next week to 10 days. You can see it here reflected, tries to develop an upper level anticyclone, which would obviously be favorable. But then again, you have some very unfavorable wind shear conditions lurking right ahead of it. See an upper level tropospheric trough kind of helping to enhance the upper level westerlies here. And this is just, it's going to run right into this, and it's not going to be good. And we could take this model out in time just to illustrate a little bit. And yeah, runs right into it. Kind of loses that upper level anticyclone. It's kind of just has westerlies just shredding it right here. That was a bit of a long arrow, but all right, we can go to the 850 millibar heights, mean sea level pressure, just to see what happens here. So it looks like it rolls off of Africa in about, give or take, 5 days. And by the 8th, 9th day, it starts to develop, and it's pretty much at its strongest point right here, right before it hits the wind shear. And then, boom, you could just see it get shredded. And then it also looks like it's starting to turn north with the weakness and the high pressure here. You can see the big high. It's kind of bullied back to the east by this upper level trough here. And that's a very strong high pressure, by the way. That's 1032. That's very strong. You can see a bit of an upper level low here, kind of working its way south, which is more of a wave breaking pattern and doesn't look very favorable. But we'll keep an eye on this. I'm not gonna really harp on it too much because the Atlantic's just not very favorable at this moment. Very strong easterlies. You can go back real quick just to look at it. But you can just see how strong these easterlies are. And you have westerlies overshooting that, like pushing 40 knots in some cases. Like, that's very strong. And then you add 40 knots of westerly wind on top of that. That's a net shear value of 80 knots. It's not good. that absolutely shreds these systems apart. But this is definitely worth a mention, but I'm not concerned about it too much. And we could see the dust particulates in the atmosphere off of the GOES satellite and see a pretty good plume coming off the next few days, working its way west. Eventually, some of it gets into our area. Should make for some pretty cool sunsets. But this is not, the dust itself is not an inhibitor of tropical development. It's the dry, stable air is indicated by these kind of arc clouds. These arc clouds are very indicative of dry, stable air. That's not good if you want to see tropical development. But we can go to the sea surface temperature plot. You can see a pretty warm Atlantic overall. A nice warm AMO look or horseshoe. And if we didn't have this, even just neutral conditions in the Enso region instead of this record-breaking El Nino, more than likely, then we would probably be looking at a pretty busy hurricane season this year. But thanks to this, you have a lot of rising motion. Think of this as like a 3D image. You have a lot of rising motion over the Pacific. It's the Walker cell. The MJO kind of parks itself here, and then you have that circulation like this, and then you get all of that sinking around the Atlantic side, which is why we tend to have fewer hurricanes in our basin in years like this. And we can go what I just did. Okay. All right. And then we can go look at the Hofmuller diagram to get a better idea of this. You can see just by looking at this, you can see the westerlies, all these red, orangish colors here. This is basically westerly winds in the lower levels of the atmosphere. And then you have easterlies kind of converging with it, which is why theirs has no choice but to rise here. And that's kind of that Walker cell again. It's the Walker cell in full effect. And El Nino has its hold on the atmosphere, I do believe. And then we can look at the MJO plot here, which is the velocity potential anomaly. And anytime you see these brown colors, that's sinking air. Not good for tropical development. We'll just put some X's there. That's not good there. You do not want to see that for tropical development. But anytime you see these green colors, very favorable. And guess where it's at? Right over the Pacific. Right where the El Nino is. All that air is forced to rise, converge at the surface, and diverge aloft. But you can see some of it tries to splash into the Atlantic. Like we had a couple of instances where that happened in the past few weeks. Right now we're in a neutral to unfavorable phase of the MJO. And over the next month, it looks much of the same. So we're not really getting hurt by this or helped. It's kind of a neutral phase. All right. Now we can move on to today's forecast. See some pretty good thunderstorms over near Lake Okeechobee and the Everglades down there, west of Miami, all working their way towards Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, those areas. Some very heavy rain in these cells here. And then up here for us, we just generally have some light showers working in off the Atlantic because our flow is generally easterly with a little bit of a southerly component. And over today, we can look at today's forecast. Get this out of the way. What just happened? Okay. I'll just leave that there, I guess. You can see what happens today. We get some pretty good thunderstorms rolling in off the Atlantic, kind of like this. And then here comes that disturbance later today, kind of working its way this way. And then most of the strongest storms should be in this corridor thanks to the Gulf sea breeze convergence. Kind of the outflow boundaries of these storms should help trigger more storms later this afternoon with extra help from daytime heating. And this is kind of your convergence zone, these dashed lines here. Can take all this away. Okay. We can go to the HRRR model, the high resolution model. I like using this model sometimes. Other times it's not very accurate, but generally gives you a good idea of what to expect. Kind of scattered showers and storms for us through about 4 p.m. and then they're done. And then you can see where all the nasty storms are going to set up later today. About the I-75 corridor up in here is generally where they should be, right here. Just about. All right, that's all I have for today. You guys have a great rest of your day. See ya.